Hello friends, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com with your thought for the day, March 28th, 2016. You might remember that after the Paris attacks last November, I wrote an editorial for the International Forecaster Problem Reaction Solution Paris edition, where I went through just some of the ways that that attack, and more precisely the reaction to that attack, allowed the authorities, quote-unquote, to institute and implement a number of plans that they already had up their sleeves. Of course, most obviously in France, where there was the suspension of the Constitution, the expansion of police and security services powers, with a special 3-month expansion granted by Parliament to suspend the Constitution. And more on that from Reuters. Holland wanting constitutional changes to be implemented, actual changes to the Constitution itself in the wake of the terror attacks. And, of course, that spilled over the borders. It wasn't just France that reacted to those attacks. It was UK and everywhere else. For example, the UK was looking at drastic cuts to police budgets, but those cuts, well, we'd have to curtail those cuts. We can't cut the police in this time of widespread international terror, can we? And then, to top it all off, of course, you had Jean-Claude Juncker coming out and calling for an EU army in the wake of the Paris terror attacks. I think we still have a few more steps to go in the problem reaction solution equation to get to the all-out EU army, but one can see how the logic of the situation dictates it. Well, there was a failure. There was a big failure, so we have to consolidate. We have to get more power. What we need is more coordinated action amongst the EU. And some people might look at these attacks and the way they're happening and the recent migration crisis and all of this and say, well, obviously this is going to shut down the EU. People are going to close up borders and close down shop, and the Schengen is going to fall apart. And we've been seeing that to a certain extent, but I would argue that that's just a small part of the broader problem reaction solution that's going on here. One that will not see the EU fall apart in that manner, but will ultimately see more power and control in the hands of the EU government, which will become a real, functional, supranational government. And surprise, surprise, lo and behold, here we are in the wake of the Brussels bombing, and could you believe it? As terrorists cross borders, Europe sees anew that its intelligence does not. From the New York Times, quote, if another example of the failure of European intelligence services to share and act on information about potential terrorists was needed, Wednesday's identification of the bombers in the deadly Brussels attack the day before certainly provides it. At least one of the attackers, Ibrahim al-Bakrawi, had been deported by Turkey to the Netherlands last year with a clear indication that he was a jihadist. Despite our warnings that this person was a foreign terrorist fighter, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey told a news conference in Ankara on Wednesday, the Belgian authorities could not identify a link to terrorism. By now, it is abundantly clear that the terrorists who work for the Islamic State and all of the people puppeting and funding and arming and training and puppeteering the Islamic State, but all of the terrorists who work for the Islamic State cooperate and operate across borders, ignoring national boundaries. The increasingly urgent question for Europe and its struggle against them is, can it do the same? If this seems like an oddly, curiously informal tone to be taking, and a very op-edy type of tone to be taking, this is not an op-ed. This is ostensibly an actual report coming from the New York Times. But anyway, as it editorializes about can Europe do the same, can it cut across those pesky national boundaries, it says the outlook is not promising. On Wednesday, there were renewed calls for a pan-European intelligence agency that would effectively share information from different countries. Members of the European Parliament took to the airwaves and print to denounce again the lack of coordination. Yet the hurdles are as basic as national pride and bureaucratic turf protection, with experts, there's that phrase again, experts, with experts pointing out that even within nations, intelligence gathering agencies, France alone has some 33 of them, have trouble cooperating. Is it not in the nature of intelligence agencies to keep the information for themselves, as Jean-Marie Delerue, who until recently headed the French agency that reviews surveillance requests from these intelligence services? Information is power. In intelligence, one only has enemies, no friends. Well, that is probably the most true sentence of this entire article, but there it is, folks. So they're already rolling out the next stage in this. Oh, okay, another intelligence failure. So what can we possibly do if the intelligence agencies screw up? Give them more power, of course. Make them international. Cut down all of these pesky national firewalls, because that's only getting in the way of the great, upstanding men and women of these intelligence services who are there to protect you. And you want to be safe, don't you? Safe from the deadly terrorists. And it really is a full court press going on right now. They're rolling out everyone, even the ex-mayor of Brussels, the city of Brussels, and he was also the former minister-president of the Brussels capital region in Belgium, to talk about this exact thing on RT. We need a pan-European FBI to counter the terror threat.
So we have to work on more and more on an international basis in Europe. We should have, of course, some kind of European FBI. That's what we should establish, to have a single police and intelligence organization working for the whole of the European Union. That's what we should have. We don't have that today. But I can tell you that the bilateral collaborations between the different member states of the European Union are tightening. They are tightening, and they've done a lot of progress over the last few years.
Well, there it is. So, and he brings up the point. Yes, bilateral relations amongst various European nations are tightening. They are working behind the scenes. They are tightening up the bureaucracies and making things more in lockstep. There is a coordination going on, even as the European Union seems to be heading towards dissolving. It is the exact opposite. It's just part of the larger dialectic where it is going to head towards more consolidation of power. And here it is, people like this what's his name, Xavier de Donier or whatever, being trotted out of some closet somewhere to deliver this from the one foot in the grave, it looks like. And that's the message that's being sent out now. It's an intelligence failure, so what do we need? We need a pan-European FBI. Not difficult or not at all surprising to anyone who's followed my work or work like it for any length of time, but there you go. And again, this doesn't need a lot of elaboration to my regular listeners, but if you are looking for a handy way of explaining this to people, my best attempt at that was probably back in 2010 when False Flags Don't Fly. Those who have studied history know that nothing invigorates and empowers an authoritarian regime more than a spectacular act of violence, some sudden and senseless loss of life that allows the autocrat to stand on the smoking rubble and identify himself as the hero. It is at moments like this that the public, still in shock from the horror of the tragedy that has just unfolded before them, can be led into the most ruthless despotism that now bears the mantle of security. Acts of terror and violence never benefit the average man or woman. They only ever benefit those in positions of power. Very, very important words to understand and internalize, that these events are always used, even if they were coming spontaneously from some outside organized terror group that the West had nothing to do with, which of course we know is a lie in the case of ISIS. But even if that were true, it is still the case that these mega acts of violence are the wet dream of every would-be autocrat and dictator. This is the stuff that autocratic regimes thrive on. They need to keep people in that sense of fear and turning towards the government to protect them from these bad men. And we have to break that. We have to break that pattern, or else the logic of the situation will lead us in one direction and one direction only. So if you are interested in any of the things that I've talked about here, of course, all of these links in the show notes, as always, linked in the video description if you're watching it on YouTube. Once again, James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.